That's weird, scientifically speaking.
Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to be doing a video today all about John Wyndham. So I discovered John Wyndham's relatively recently, and just like a couple of years ago, and I've been dying to read his stuff ever since then. I've been sort of picking through them slowly, and I've read 5 of his books now, and I want to talk about those 5 books because all of them are great. And obviously he's a absolutely classic, celebrated author, so I'm sure lots of you know him already. But if you don't know him, or you've heard of him and you haven't read anything yet, then go ahead and read something, because honestly, it's definitely one of those cases where the author absolutely deserves the reputation he's got. So I really read him because I was interested in reading Daily Triffids. So I am going to mention that because it blew my tiny mind. So yeah, we're going to be talking about blindness and big plants. We're going to be talking about an ecological kind of metaphorical monster thing. We're going to talk about mutants. We'll talk about slowing down the aging process, kind of immortality. Slowing down the aging process and immortality, so debates around that. And we'll be talking about an alien invasion that's kind of very subtly done with children controlling a village. All that stuff. So if I've already hinted at all the 5 books, and you know all those 5 books, then please comment below on what you think of those 5 books. So yeah, John Wyndham. He started off in the 30s, writing in the 1930s, as John M. Harris, and basically he decided to change his name and concentrate on a particular style of science fiction in the 50s, when he started to get some difficulty with his popularity with what he was writing as John M. Harris. So he was a big fan of H.G. Wells, and it actually, you can see it in the writing. I think if you get a similar feeling when you're reading H.G. Wells to when you're reading John Wyndham, I think. So they do have a very similar tone, very similar depth of language, and very similar characterization as well. So yeah, I can see his influence massively. At the moment, I probably prefer John Wyndham to H.G. Wells, which is really mad. I need to read more of H.G. Wells because that seems like a strange thing to say. I've read some of H.G. Wells. I've read about 5 of his books as well. But yeah, I'm absolutely loving the John Wyndham journey I'm on. And I've got a couple of others to read as well. So, 1951, The Daily Triffids. This has obviously been adapted into films and a TV special from the 80s. I remember that the BBC made, and a special thing that came up recently, a few years ago. Well, actually, it might have been about 10 years ago now. But I recently saw it, and Eddie Izzard in it. That was a really good adaptation, actually. So there's been lots of adaptations of it. But really, I wanted to know what the book was like. And it really is brilliantly written. It's compelling. It's really interesting. The characterizations are brilliant. You really do get a feel for what's happening. And it's pretty apocalyptic. It's 2 things that are happening concurrently in the book. You've got most of the world becoming blind because they're all fascinated by this huge astral thing that's going to happen, where there was going to be these sort of flares that were going to be happening. So everyone looked up to the sky because they were like, oh, this is going to be amazing. But it blinded them all. So the only ones that weren't affected were the ones that didn't look. So there wasn't many of them because obviously most people were curious. And the main character was having an operation on his eyes. So he actually had his eyes covered during that moment. And when he wakes up, he realizes everybody's blind. And the other thing that's happening is that scientists were experimenting with plants to try and create renewable energy, and they had these plants called triffids that they were working with, and basically that all goes wrong because the triffids are sentient, dangerous, monstrous plants that end up taking advantage of the situation with the blindness and destroying the cities and making people fear for their lives, quite rightly. And what's really interesting as well about this is I found out that this was written on the back of genuine research that was happening in the science field with them experimenting on plants in the 40s. So It's kind of interesting. He was bouncing off that and thought he'd make this awesome plot out of it. So yeah, Daily Triffids. I read it and I genuinely thought it was one of the best books I'd ever read. It really is a phenomenal book. If you read it, don't worry about if you've seen any of the adaptations. Just like I would have said with The Martian, it really works anyway, and it keeps you gripped to the page, regardless of whether or not you know the plot or not. It's that well written. So, and I really love the ending. I really like the ending. I think it's a really awesome ending, and actually different to the adaptations. I think certainly different to the recent adaptation. I was really young when the 80s thing came out, so I don't know what the ending is of that. But yeah, I think the ending in the book is really, really good. So yeah, John Wyndham, Daily Triffids. I'm talking about these in the order that I read them. So that was the first thing I read by John Wyndham. And then I decided to go for the Kraken Wakes. This was a bit of a slow build. It takes a little while to get going. The Daily Triffids kicks in pretty quickly. This one does become really rewarding by the end of it. I think it's really good, but you have to kind of stick with it for a good sort of 50, 70 pages before you start really feeling something, I think. But basically, I mean, it's like Revenge of the Seas, because the oceans and what's in the oceans are kind of having their revenge on what we do to the planet. And basically, you've got these scientists trying to deal with it, and you've got governments trying to work together to try and cope with the devastation that's happening around the world. It's really awesome. So it's a big, epic story, and it works really well. And again, it's a good ending. He does seem to resolve these books really well. It's a great book. But I'd say out of the 5, I think for me it's the weakest one. But as I'm saying, they are really good. So it's a moot point because they are really good. But out of the 5, for me, it's the weakest one. So then, after I read that, I read the Chrysalids. So now the Chrysalids was really interesting. I didn't know what to expect. It's slightly shorter, only a little bit shorter than the others. They're all relatively short anyway. But the Chrysalids is when John Wyndham decides to go into looking at mutants, and this new breed of humans that start being born. This was kind of on the back of the fear of nuclear holocaust, nuclear power, nuclear war, nuclear bombs, all those kind of things, because the idea of what's happening in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was still being felt, and he wanted to kind of react to that and talk about what could have happened. And he creates this cult that's trying to destroy the mutants, and it's like, you know, man against man. And again, I think he's trying to say something about what people were feeling in the 50s. I mean, when he wrote The Kraken Wakes, there were actually huge floods around the world because of the ice caps melting. So back in the 50s, that was happening. I mean, it's crazy that now it's such a massive thing in the news, and people are taking notice, and people are trying to do something about it. But in the 50s, it was happening, and it was getting reported. So he was reacting to that and making fiction out of it, and trying to put these cautionary tales out there to say, you know, we need to do something, and we need to treat people better and be more accepting and tolerant. So yeah, the Chrysalids is about some kids that discover they're mutants, and the main protagonist is trying to hide it for a lot of the story, and then when he realizes he can't hide it anymore, him and some other mutants go to try and escape from the people who are trying to destroy mutants, and try and find somewhere to be free, and free from attack and suspicion and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a really, really cool book, and one of my favourites out of the John Wyndham books I've read. I mean, they're all brilliant. But okay, so then another one that's been developed loads by Hollywood and all that kind of thing is the Midwich cuckoos. So the Chrysalids was 1955. This is 1957. So just a couple of years later, he releases this one, and I'll just tell you the plot first. This is about a UFO that basically starts manipulating a very small rural village, a fictional rural village in England, and it isolates it from the rest of the world. And during that very brief amount of time, it's only I don't know, 36 hours or something, 61 women, all the women in the village that could be pregnant, are made pregnant by these aliens, and the children that are born from that alien invasion are not like real humans. They are clearly aliens, and they start manipulating the village. And very soon, after a little while, the village realizes that they are potentially powerless to deal with these children, and they need to do something about it. And it's just brilliantly done. The ending is fantastic. And again, quite a lot of time with these stories is like there's one kind of main character that kind of goes out of his way to do something heroic or whatever, or is being heroic in different ways in different points of the story. And yeah, this is a really cool story. And again, the children are telepaths, and on TV in the 50s, telepathy was being discussed as, you know, could it be a thing? Is it real? What would happen if it was real? Those kind of things were being discussed on TV. So he took that as inspiration for this story. So, you know, again, he was always reacting to what was around him, and had a really clear and interesting creative mind about how he's going to turn it into a story. And these are all really good stories with really interesting characters. So the Midwich Cuckoos, this has been adapted a couple of times into Village of the Damned, or Children of the Damned maybe, certainly Village of the Damned. John Carpenter did one, and there was one earlier as well. So if you've seen that, then you know what I'm talking about. There are these blonde kids with shiny eyes that are controlling the village. And yeah, it was really, really good. Again, another one of his great books. And then the last book I read in this group of 5 that I've just finished is Trouble with Lycan. So this is one of the different book editions, different sets of covers. I'm not sure which ones. I kind of like this sort of cute cartoony ones, but I really like this sort of consistency of these ones as well. But anyway, I knew I was doing this, and I wanted to read this quick, and this came up really cheap, so I wanted to get it quick. And this is actually my second favourite. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Really, really, really good. And I couldn't wait to finish it, because I was just turning the page really quickly. It was so good. Trouble with Lycan. I didn't expect it to be as good as well. I thought this was, knowing what I knew about the plot, I thought it was going to be one of the weakest ones, but it wasn't at all. So this was published in 1960, and it's weird actually, because I seem to have accidentally read them in the order they were published. So I've got more to read, but I think these actually are the 5 most famous books by him. I've got Chucky to read, and I have got the Seeds of Time that I've read some of, because they're short stories. But yeah, I think these are actually the 5 most famous books. But I read them in the order they were published, which was a pure accident. So 1960, this was produced, and it's a classic discussion that's been happening in science fiction for many, 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 many decades, which is that idea of slowing the aging process and the idea of immortality. Do we want to live forever? And in the question of this book, do you want to live until you're 200? Because that's when the scientists expect people to live to, with this treatment that's being used in the book. And basically, you've got lots of different things explored. You've got the social implications of things like the religious leaders reacting to the question of extending your life. You've got the social implications of just what does that mean as far as are you going to be able to work for longer? Does that change the nature of what kind of job you'll have? Are you going to be able to be more of a presence in a big corporation if you're leading a huge company? And does that change the nature of the company? All sorts of things like that are explored. But the biggest thing that it explores is how it affects women. The main character in the book is a woman. She's a scientist who realizes that the main guy, Francis, has discovered this lichen that can slow down the aging process, and she goes off and kind of looks into it herself and starts something up herself, and their stories interact for a really cool ending. It's another book with a great ending, and basically through her business and through discussion in the book, in the text of the book, and through other characters as well, it's all about how does that affect women if they are aging slower, and does that change the nature of them being mothers, their position in the family, their attitude to work and employment. So there's a little bit of a feminist kind of tinge to this, which is really awesome. And you know, I mean, if you think about the fact it was written in 1960, this is the beginning of that being discussed a lot in society. But I'd say probably a little bit ahead of its time, though, because I don't think it wasn't until going into the 60s that it was talked about in a big way. I mean, the 50s were very much a sort of family values traditional society, wasn't it? So yeah, I think that's really awesome that he did that, and it's done really well. And you are left with those thoughts about, well, what will it mean? Do I want to live till I'm 200, and do I want to try and extend it further? And you know, that kind of thing. And you've got some people that are absolutely appalled by the idea. They're not necessarily appalled for religious reasons. They're just appalled by the idea of living that long. You've got some sort of left-wing factions that are trying to make sure that the poor people get the treatment as much as the rich people. And you've got one group that just want the Queen to be given the treatment, which is quite funny. And all that sort of thing is explored. And the idea of beauty and the way that women are judged by their beauty so much, and that the physical effects of the aging process don't affect men in the same way, because ultimately it is true that you know, to some degree women do have to face that much more. They think about that a lot more, and they think about that in a personal level a lot more, and men can get away with looking older and it still doesn't really affect their life. So yeah, that's discussed in the book a lot. So it's a very deep book with a lot of layers. I think it's brilliantly written, and it is actually the one that I would say is my next favourite, next to Daily Triffids out of the 5. So Trouble with Lycan, big surprise. I thought it was just going to be like a romantic thing that I'd sort of enjoy, I'd appreciate, but not necessarily enjoy that much. But I really enjoyed reading it. I was really intrigued to see what was going to happen next. There's a few surprises in it. There's a big surprise at the end, which I thought was quite a brave thing to do, but actually makes perfect sense. So, John Wyndham, an absolutely amazing author. 5 books there that I'd recommend all of them. And like I said, The Kraken Wakes is the weakest one. So if you're sort of not really sure which one to start with, I wouldn't start with that one. But any of the others, definitely start with them. So what do you think of John Wyndham? If you've read his stuff, I'm sure lots of you have read some of it at least, then please comment below on what you think, because he's blown me away. And now he's competing with H.G. Wells in that kind of science fiction. Thanks a lot. See you later. Thanks for subscribing. Bye.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to be